Step into a world of magic and wonder. Watch your favorite princesses overcome curses and find true love. A beautiful collection of enchanted stories featuring magical transformations and heartwarming endings. In a tranquil village nestled at the foot of the mist-covered mountains of ancient China, there lived a spirited and graceful young maiden named Hua Mulan, whose heart was as vast as the open plains. She was never one to find joy in the quiet, restrictive art of embroidery, preferring instead to spend her golden afternoons mastering the swift arc of an arrow and the disciplined, powerful rhythm of martial arts. One fateful afternoon, the heavy silence of the village was shattered by the thunderous beat of imperial drums and the loud, echoing announcement of the emperor's urgent mobilization decree for all able-bodied men. The fierce invaders from the desolate northern steppes were sweeping across the Great Wall like a dark tide, and every household was commanded by law to send one strong man to join the imperial army. Mulan's father, a venerable warrior of the past with a soul full of honor, was now old and frail with trembling hands. Yet he began to polish his rusted armor because duty was his highest calling. As the pale moon rose that night, Mulan watched her father's stooped silhouette by the flickering oil lamp, and her heart tightened with a deep, suffocating sense of worry for his fragile life in the coming war. She understood with painful clarity that if her father marched to the frontier in his weakened state, the biting winds of the north and the chaotic blood of battle would ensure he never returned to his home. Driven by a desperate and bold love that outweighed her fear, Mulan made a perilous decision to disguise her true identity and take her father's place among the ranks of the emperor's grand army. With a sharp blade and a steady hand that did not waver, she quietly cut off her long, flowing black hair. Watching the dark tresses fall to the cold floor like a forgotten memory of her girlhood, she carefully donned her father's heavy iron armor, tightened the worn leather belt around her waist, and strapped the ancient family sword firmly to her side. Feeling the weight of generations on her shoulders, before the first light of dawn could touch the horizon, she led her loyal horse out of the stable and vanished into the thick morning fog without daring to whisper a final, tearful goodbye to her sleeping parents. Journeying across jagged mountain ridges and wide, lonely rivers for many days, Mulan eventually joined the endless, dusty line of weary men marching toward the grim and distant training camps of the north. She gave herself a strong male name, steeled her gaze to hide her mounting fear, and practiced speaking in a much deeper, firmer voice until it sounded like the commanding call of a true soldier. Life in the military was a relentless and grueling cycle of exhaustion, with physical training that lasted from the very first light of sunrise until the cold stars began to blink in the velvet sky late at night. Mulan forced herself to work twice as hard as any man around her, pushing her aching body to its absolute limits so that no one would ever suspect the secret she carried beneath her heavy bronze breastplate. She mastered the staggering weight of the long spear, learned to command a galloping warhorse through the chaos of noise, and shot her arrows with such incredible precision they struck the center of every bullseye. Gradually, through her quiet wisdom, her sharp intellect, and her extraordinary courage in the face of grave danger, she earned the unwavering respect and the deep trust of all her brave brothers in arms. The first great battle erupted in a desolate, narrow valley covered in waist-deep snow, where the frozen air was filled with the terrifying, savage cries of a fierce and powerful enemy attacking from the shadows. Amidst the choking black smoke and the deafening, rhythmic clashing of cold steel, Mulan was always the pioneer, a silver flash of bravery charging forward like a storm into the very heart of the enemy's line. She took command of a small, scattered division and executed a series of brilliant, sudden tactics that managed to turn the tide and push back the overwhelming waves of the savage northern invaders. As the long, weary years of war dragged on, the name of the mysterious and talented young general spread like wildfire throughout the ranks, reaching the ears of the high commanders and the emperor himself. However, during a particularly fierce and bloody encounter on the edge of a steep cliff, Mulan was seriously wounded by a stray poisoned arrow and fell into a deep, dark unconsciousness amidst the falling snow, while the camp doctors were frantically working to save her life and treating her life-threatening injuries. The long-kept secret of her true identity was finally revealed to the shocked and silent eyes of the soldiers, though the ancient military laws were incredibly strict regarding such deception. The commander and her loyal comrades could only feel a profound sense of awe for the incredible sacrifice she had made for her father. Instead of demanding the traditional punishment of death, they chose to stand loyally by her side, recognizing her as their true leader and the only one who could guide them in the final, most decisive battle. With her signature clever strategy, Mulan lured the overconfident enemy forces into a massive mountain trap, securing a resounding and historic victory that would be remembered by poets for many centuries to come. The country was finally cleared of the invaders. The golden banners of the emperor flew high once more, and a fragile, beautiful peace returned to the scorched but resiliently lush green fields of the south. The emperor himself summoned the legendary young heroine to his magnificent, gold-leafed palace in the capital, intending to grant her a high noble title and immense riches of jade and silk for her service. But Mulan politely and humbly declined all the fame, the power, and the overflowing chests of gold, kneeling before the throne and asking for only one simple thing in return for her long years of sacrifice. "Your Imperial Majesty, I only wish to return to my humble village to care for my elderly father, who has been waiting in the shadows of our home for my return through every season of the war." The great emperor was deeply moved by her profound filial piety and gifted her the finest, swiftest horse in the imperial stables, along with a magnificent robe of pure silk embroidered with golden flowers. Mulan finally stripped off the heavy, blood-stained iron armor of war, put on her simple old dress from her youth, and began the long, reflective journey back across the mountains to her childhood home. The familiar wooden gate of her village finally appeared through the trees, where her father stood leaning heavily against the doorframe, his tired eyes searching the horizon with a flickering glimmer of hope. The old man could hardly believe his weary eyes when he saw his beloved daughter returning to him, no longer a soldier of the realm but a woman of unmatched strength, wisdom, and everlasting grace. The two embraced each other in the dust of the road, weeping tears of overwhelming joy and immense pride that transcended all the silent years of suffering, worry, and the heavy burden of her secret. The villagers crowded into her small, sunlit courtyard to listen in hushed and respectful silence to the extraordinary and harrowing stories of her life on the distant, frozen frontiers of the northern wilderness. Mulan had proven to the entire world that true courage knows no gender and that honor is not defined by one's outward appearance or birth, but by the fire and the strength of one's inner spirit. Her legendary story was told and retold from generation to generation, becoming a shining, eternal example of bravery, love, and the unbreakable, sacred bond between a devoted child and a loving parent. Under the fragrant, blooming branches of the mukin tree in her quiet garden, she lived a long and peaceful life, surrounded by the deep respect and the admiration of everyone who knew her remarkable story. This is the eternal legend of the girl who broke all ancient traditions to save her family and her entire nation from the brink of total ruin, leaving a legacy that will never be forgotten. Deep beneath the vast, rolling turquoise waves, where the sun's golden light fades into a shimmering, ethereal blue twilight, there lies a magnificent and sprawling coral kingdom guarded by glowing reefs and ancient mysteries of the abyss. The powerful Sea King, distinguished by his flowing silver beard and a majestic trident forged from fallen starlight, reigned over 6 beautiful mermaid princesses, among whom the youngest, Ariel, was the most dream-filled and contemplative of all, while her older sisters were perfectly content with the tranquil silence and predictable rhythms of the ocean floor. Ariel's heart and mind were entirely consumed by forbidden myths of the solid earth and the chaotic, sun-drenched life of humans. she would sit for hours at her grandmother's tale, listening to vivid, whispered memories that described the bustling coastal towns, the fragrant scent of blooming flowers, and the mesmerizing wonders of a world that existed entirely out of water. In a hidden, crystalline grotto carved into the jagged sea cliffs, Ariel kept a secret, cherished collection of shiny gold coins, elegant marble statues, and rare, rusted artifacts salvaged from the skeletal remains of long-lost shipwrecks. Upon finally reaching her momentous 15th birthday, the day she had long anticipated with a racing heart, she was granted the royal permission to swim to the crystal-clear surface to witness the forbidden horizon for the very first time. She emerged amidst a grand, towering sailing ship anchored under a silver moon, where a lavish birthday celebration was underway, filled with the echoes of lively music and pyrotechnics that painted the dark velvet sky in brilliant colors. On the polished deck, the flickering lantern light illuminated the handsome, noble face of a young prince, whose dark, soulful eyes and wind-swept hair captured Ariel's innocent heart at the very first sight, changing her destiny forever. Suddenly, a violent and merciless storm struck the vessel without any warning, snapping the tall timber masts like twigs and throwing the prince into the frigid, churning waves that threatened to swallow his mortal soul into the deep. Without a single moment's hesitation, Ariel plunged into the swirling, deadly vortex, using all her supernatural mermaid strength to lift the unconscious prince and carry him through the gale to the soft, pale sands of a nearby convent shore. She hid behind the jagged, salt-sprayed rocks until a young maiden from the convent discovered and rescued him, after which Ariel dove back into the foam with a heavy heart, his image forever burned into her eternal memory. From that fateful, tragic moment, a burning and uncontrollable desire to be transformed into a human, so she could walk beside him and earn his love, became a constant, painful obsession that haunted her every waking hour beneath the sea. Driven by a desperate and unyielding love that ignored all reason, she sought out the terrifying, bone-strewn lair of the sea witch Ursula, whose voice was like the crashing surf and whose dark sorcery was feared by all creatures. The cunning Ursula, with a predatory smile, agreed to grant her slender, graceful human legs in exchange for her shimmering, iridescent fishtail, which was the only way she could ever hope to integrate into the prince's foreign world. But the steep, heart-wrenching price demanded was Ariel's divine singing voice, the musical jewel of the entire ocean kingdom, which had to be permanently sealed away within a magical, glowing seashell, leaving her in absolute silence. "You shall have your human form," the witch warned with a cackle, "but every single step you take on land will haunt you with excruciating agony, as if sharp, invisible knives were piercing through your tender, new flesh." The cruelest and most heartless condition was that if the prince married anyone else within 3 days, Ariel would lose her only chance at gaining an eternal soul, transform into cold sea foam, and vanish into the waves forever. Disregarding the horrific threats and the loss of her identity, Ariel accepted the devilish bargain with a trembling hand, feeling the searing heat of the magic as her voice was drawn out and exchanged for her new, fragile legs. The sorceress performed the dark, rhythmic ritual, and Ariel felt her brilliant, powerful scales shrink and tear apart into two weak, human limbs, leaving her feeling utterly vulnerable and overwhelmed by a blinding, white-hot pain. She washed up on a secluded, rocky beach, and as her soft feet touched the coarse, burning sand, a numbing pain radiated through her entire being, forcing her to lie still on the damp shore as a stranger to herself. The prince, during his solitary morning walk, discovered the silent and mysterious girl, and being struck by her gentle beauty and the profound sorrow in her eyes, he brought her back to his grand seaside palace to recover. Ariel, despite the excruciating, daily torment of every movement, danced with a heartbreaking grace for the prince, her motions a silent, lyrical poetry that she masked with a brave and hopeful smile to hide her inner suffering. The prince grew to cherish her as a kindred spirit and a wonderful, silent companion. yet he never once realized the deep, romantic, and sacrificial love that burned within her mute heart as she watched him from afar. In his distracted mind, the one who had truly saved his life during the great storm was still the maiden with the heavenly voice whom he believed he found by the convent, never suspecting Ariel was his true savior. Seeing their bond grow, the jealous sea witch Ursula decided to act, using her dark, manipulative sorcery to create a perfect, wicked trap for Ariel's innocent and fragile hopes of finding a place in the human world. She transformed herself into a stunning, golden-haired girl named Vanessa, using Ariel's stolen, magical voice to sing and enchant the prince, capturing his entire attention and devotion in a single, calculated instant of deception. The prince was immediately mesmerized by the familiar, haunting melody of the stolen voice, believing he had finally found his destined savior, and he never suspected the dark, monstrous identity hidden beneath the beautiful stranger's face. They swiftly arranged a royal wedding on a magnificent, flag-strewn ship, preparing for a union that would shatter Ariel's thin hopes of survival before the 3-day deadline had reached its inevitable and tragic end. Ariel stood in utter despair upon the high deck, watching the prince's ship glide away into the sunset, feeling her cruel fate closing in like the cold, rising tide of a darkening and indifferent evening sea. As the first pale light of dawn prepared to break across the horizon, she knew her mortal destiny would soon be sealed, and she would fade away into the ephemeral foam of the ocean she once called home. Suddenly, Ariel's mermaid sisters emerged from the dark waves, clutching a magical, glowing silver dagger they had obtained by trading their long, beautiful tresses of hair with the wicked and greedy sea witch of the deep. They handed the cold blade to Ariel, pleading through desperate tears, "You must slay the prince before the very first ray of sun rises. His warm blood will break the curse and return you to us." Ariel crept silently into the prince's royal sleeping quarters and watched him resting peacefully in the arms of his bride. But her immense and selfless love proved far stronger than her own instinct for survival. She could not bring herself to commit such a heartless and bloody act against the only man she had ever loved, even if it meant accepting her own quiet, lonely, and inevitable demise at the break of day. As the first rays of the morning sun turned the horizon into a streak of fire and gold, Ariel dropped the silver dagger into the deep and cast herself heroically into the cold, waiting waters of the sea. She felt her physical body beginning to dissolve into millions of soft, white bubbles, floating lightly and aimlessly upon the calm and silent surface of the vast, waking ocean as the world began to stir. At that exact, divine moment of destiny, the daughters of the air, ethereal spirits of light and goodness, appeared to her in a warm and gentle glow, surrounding her with a sense of peace she had never known. They whispered to Ariel that because of her noble self-sacrifice and her pure, unconditional love that transcended her own life, she had been granted a rare and sacred chance to earn a truly immortal human soul. The little mermaid felt her being lifted upward toward the clouds, freed from her physical pain and her mortal, silent form, becoming a spirit of the air as light and free as a summer breeze over the water. She drifted high over the sea, smiling down at the mourning prince with a heart full of forgiveness, waiting for her centuries of quiet service to finally lead her to an eternal and peaceful reunion in the heavens. Within the labyrinthine alleyways and beneath the perpetually scorching sun of the ancient, vibrant city of Agrabah, resided the cunning but fundamentally good-hearted youth, Aladdin, whose primary occupation was skillfully surviving the systemic injustices of extreme poverty. His daily routine consisted of navigating the crowded, spice-scented marketplace, adeptly dodging the overzealous royal guards, all while constantly nurturing a fervent, secret desire for a dignified life far removed from constant hunger and threadbare garments. Aladdin's most profound and unyielding ambition was focused entirely on liberating his frail, aging mother from the heavy burden of endless toil. envisioning a future where she could finally rest comfortably and peacefully in a secure home. One deceptively ordinary afternoon, a tall, elegantly robed man of commanding presence, whose eyes held a strangely unsettling, cold calculation, approached Aladdin, weaving an elaborate, fabricated tale of being his long-lost, extremely wealthy maternal uncle. This imposing, false relative was none other than a formidable, power-hungry sorcerer originating from the mysterious, distant Maghreb, meticulously orchestrating a complex scheme to acquire a potent, world-altering magical artifact for his destructive ends. The sorcerer, employing carefully rehearsed, persuasive eloquence, promised Aladdin a swift, unbelievable transformation into a tremendously affluent and universally respected nobleman, an irresistible offer designed to exploit the boy's deepest vulnerabilities, completely overcome by the intoxicating lure of instantaneous fortune and desperate for a radical change in circumstances. The knave Aladdin wholeheartedly embraced the outwardly generous but inherently treacherous proposal. Ignoring the faint warning signs of the man's cold demeanor, their clandestine journey led them far away from the familiar city sounds, trekking laboriously across the vast, silent, golden dunes until they eventually arrived at an isolated, ominous clearing dominated by an enormous, intricately carved stone slab. After performing a spectacular, terrifying array of magical gestures and whispering dark, guttural incantations, the massive stone slab violently lifted, grudgingly exposing the gaping, impossibly dark maw of the legendary cavern below. The sorcerer, his voice dropping to a low, intense conspiratorial tone, explained that this forbidden locale was the infamous Cave of Wonders, which held countless ancient riches, but most importantly, a single, unassuming bronze lamp. Aladdin was sternly instructed to make the perilous descent, retrieve only the specific dust-caked oil lamp, and rigorously avoid touching any of the tempting, distracting gold and precious stones littering the floor. Despite the overwhelming, paralyzing fear gripping his heart, Aladdin resolutely stepped into the echoing blackness, driven forward by the profound hope that this solitary act would be the definitive key to unlocking his new, prosperous destiny. The subterranean space was a breathtaking, dizzying spectacle, illuminating the sheer magnitude of forgotten treasure, cascading waterfalls of jewels and gleaming mountains of antique gold coins, a sight intended to test the strongest resolve. Successfully resisting the powerful, avaricious temptation, Aladdin carefully located the desired artifact, finding the tarnished, heavy oil lamp nestled deep within the inner recesses of the dusty chamber. Upon returning to the illuminated entrance, Aladdin cautiously requested the sorcerer's strong aid to pull him out of the deep shaft before handing over the lamp, a moment of street-smart wisdom born of ingrained distrust, driven to a frenzy by his burning obsession and utter lack of patience. The sorcerer reacted with savage fury, violently slamming the massive stone lid back into place, sealing Aladdin's fate with a sickening, final thud. Utterly abandoned and consumed by absolute despair, Aladdin slumped against the cold stone, realizing the immense tragedy of his situation. Surrounded by boundless wealth that now served only as a cold, pointless monument to his imminent demise, while nervously pacing the confined space, rubbing his trembling hands together for comfort, Aladdin unknowingly brushed the ancient, gritty surface of the plain oil lamp he still tightly clutched. With an immediate, earth-shaking detonation of noise and a dizzying funnel of smoking, ethereal light, a colossal, muscle-bound genie, radiant in shifting shades of sapphire and azure, instantly materialized before the astonished youth. The booming, reverberating voice of the genie announced his eternal existence as the powerful, magical slave to the lamp, now unequivocally bound to serve the commands of its frightened, bewildered new master, quickly transitioning from terror to an exhilarating, dizzying comprehension. Aladdin suddenly grasped the incredible, mind-boggling reality that he possessed a force capable of manipulating the very fabric of existence, his very first, deeply heartfelt command bypassed all material desires. Focusing purely on survival, he simply wished to be instantly transported, safe and sound, far away from the dark tomb and back to his small, familiar house. The omnipresent genie granted the earnest plea effortlessly, instantly dissolving the physical space between them, safely delivering Aladdin and the magical vessel back into the comforting familiarity of his mother's humble kitchen. Over time, Aladdin meticulously learned the intricacies and strict limitations of the three powerful wishes, understanding that true, spontaneous love and resurrection from death were fundamentally outside the genie's omnipotence. He carefully utilized his second wish, meticulously commanding the genie to meticulously fabricate an identity for him as a fabulously wealthy, charming, and highly respected prince of unquestionable royal lineage. Backed by the genie's reality-altering magic, Aladdin quickly acquired a palatial, snow-white residence filled with priceless artifacts, along with a perfectly choreographed retinue of devoted, impeccably uniformed attendants. Completing his unbelievable transformation, this meticulously constructed royal facade provided Aladdin with the necessary social standing to formally petition the Sultan for the coveted hand of the exquisitely beautiful and fiercely intelligent Princess Jasmine. Princess Jasmine, renowned across the continents for her unwavering spirit and determined refusal to enter into an emotionally sterile, politically motivated marriage, regarded the new prince with initial, profound skepticism and reserve. Nevertheless, Aladdin's genuine warmth, his underlying innate humility, and shared adventurous spirit gradually broke down the princess's formidable defenses, culminating in a passionate, authentic union of deep affection. Their glorious, newfound marital bliss and the tranquility of the kingdom were violently shattered by the meticulous, patient reappearance of the relentlessly vindictive, dark-hearted sorcerer, concealing his malevolence beneath the guise of a harmless, wandering street peddler. The sorcerer loudly called out his deceptive, memorable offer of new lamps for old, banking on the ignorance of the palace staff. The unsuspecting Princess Jasmine, believing the tarnished old oil lamp was merely worthless clutter, carelessly exchanged the powerful artifact for the shiny, superficial brass one offered by the cunning old man. With the supreme power of the lamp finally secured, the triumphant sorcerer immediately commanded the heartbroken genie to magically and instantaneously relocate the entire enormous palace and the terrified princess to his remote, desolate desert fortress. Aladdin returned home from hunting to a horrifying void where his palace had stood and his beloved wife was missing, left completely alone with only the weak, secondary power of the ancient ring's genie, utilizing the minor, but crucially helpful, power of the ring-dwelling genie. Aladdin was swiftly and secretly transported across the treacherous, dark waters directly to the isolated, forbidding site of the sorcerer's new stronghold. Displaying profound courage and sharp tactical thinking, he devised an intricate plan to personally recover the stolen lamp through clever subterfuge, entirely preserving his last powerful wish for the safety of the princess. In a climactic and intensely dramatic struggle of wits against dark magic, Aladdin expertly tricked the overconfident sorcerer, seizing the magical lamp back from his grasp at the peak of the villain's hubris. His very last and most selfless command to the genie was to permanently neutralize the great threat, banishing the wicked, treacherous sorcerer to an inescapable, silent dimension for the remainder of time. The entire majestic palace, with the beautiful, greatly relieved Princess Jasmine inside, was instantaneously and safely returned to its original, familiar location in Agrabah, signaling the definitive and joyful conclusion to the horrific ordeal. Demonstrating his supreme, noble character, Aladdin utilized his ultimate freedom to generously grant the loyal, ancient genie his complete and total emancipation from the lamp's bondage, ensuring that he and Princess Jasmine would forever live their extraordinarily happy lives together, solely sustained by their unwavering love, wisdom, and remarkable courage. In a distant, opulent land stood a magnificent, sprawling castle which sadly belonged to a young, handsome, immensely wealthy, but incredibly arrogant and supremely selfish prince who only valued his own extravagant pleasure. On extremely cold, unforgiving winter night, a seemingly frail, shivering beggar woman arrived at the grand castle door and politely requested temporary shelter in exchange for a single, perfect, deep red rose. Arrogant, haughty prince scornfully laughed out loud at her humble offering and coldly, cruelly turned the impoverished old woman away from the warm comfort of his lavish, brightly lit home, showing absolutely no kindness or human hospitality. Beggar woman immediately warned the prince not to be carelessly fooled by mere superficial outward appearances, asserting that true beauty must always be found deep within the soul. But the shallow prince simply dismissed her words with contemptuous disdain and arrogance. Suddenly, the seemingly weak beggar woman transformed in an instant into a powerful, magnificent enchantress whose intense, righteous presence filled the entire huge ballroom with a blinding, terrifying light and shimmering magic. Severely punished the spoiled prince for his immense cruelty, his unbearable self-absorption, and his total lack of love or empathy. The powerful enchantress transformed him into a grotesque, fearsome, and utterly miserable beast, covered in thick fur and bearing huge, menacing horns. Also magically and immediately transformed all the castle's loyal and innocent servants into various bewildered enchanted household objects, such as upright clocks, talking teapots, and charming candlesticks. The enchantress solemnly warned the now miserable beast that he had to successfully find true, pure, selfless love for another person, and that person must genuinely, truly love him back before the last final petal fell from the magical, enchanted rose. Meanwhile, in a lively, nearby quaint French village surrounded by lush fields, lived a beautiful, intelligent, and fiercely independent young woman named Belle, who loved to spend her days reading classic adventure books. Belle lived a simple but profoundly fulfilling life with her eccentric, white-haired, and endlessly devoted father, Maurice, who was a passionate but often ridiculously ridiculed local inventor. On unfortunate, blustery, and windswept day, Maurice departed on a vital trading journey to the market but quickly became terribly lost, confused, and dangerously disoriented during a sudden, violent, thick snowstorm deep in the surrounding forest. Desperately searching for any dry, safe refuge and sanctuary from the relentless, freezing storm and the hungry wolves, the frightened inventor stumbled upon the eerie, immense, and magically quiet castle lurking nearby. The huge, angry, and territorial beast immediately discovered the frightened, soaked Maurice trespassing inside his private courtyard and furiously locked the frail, elderly man in a cold, dark, stone prison cell in the isolated dungeon. Belle, noticing her father's unusual and prolonged absence, bravely traced his frantic horse's path to the remote, foreboding fortress. Determined to confront the dangerous owner and rescue her loved one, Belle rushed fearlessly inside the giant, shadowy castle and bravely demanded her elderly father's immediate and unconditional release, refusing to leave the premises until he was safely freed from captivity. Monstrous beast presented a cruel, inescapable ultimatum: he would free Maurice, but only if Belle agreed to become his permanent, unwilling prisoner in the cold, silent castle. Replacing her father completely. Courageous Belle selflessly accepted the terrifying offer, making the ultimate sacrifice of her cherished freedom to save her beloved father from the beast's stark, suffocating dungeon and his terrible wrath. Heartbroken Maurice was reluctantly sent home in a magical, quick carriage, utterly devastated, racked with overwhelming guilt, and consumed with tears at leaving his cherished, brave daughter with the fearful creature. Belle soon met the beast's wonderfully quirky, often fretting, and magically delightful enchanted servants, who immediately tried their absolute best to gently comfort the distraught young woman with kindness and soothing servants, including the overbearing Cogsworth the clock and the flamboyant Lumi Ray the candlestick. secretly held onto hope that Belle might be the key to finally breaking their terrible, painful enchantment. The lonely, tormented beast kept the one magical, perpetually glowing, deep crimson rose under a decorative, protective glass bell jar in the most inaccessible, deeply shadowed corner of his large private window. Every single day, the beautiful but magically delicate rose slowly, visibly began to tragically lose its vibrant, precious petals, each one symbolically reminding the beast of the critical, rapidly dwindling time remaining for him. The enchanted rose was indeed a critical, life-defining timer. The cursed beast knew he absolutely had to sincerely find, successfully earn, and truly reciprocate true, genuine love before the last, final withered petal sadly descended to the dusty stone floor. At the very beginning, the beast was harsh, demanding, and constantly ill-tempered, and Belle found him absolutely unbearable, incredibly rude, and entirely frustrating, often refusing to meekly follow his strict rules. But slowly, over shared evening dinners, tentative conversations, and moments of shared quiet, the compassionate Belle began to see small glimpses of the lonely, sad, and fundamentally good heart buried deep beneath the beast's terrifying exterior. The beast, in turn, began to learn patience, tenderness, and genuine kindness from Belle, allowing her full, unrestricted access to his vast, magnificent, and sprawling private library, which delighted her beyond all measure. They began spending countless hours together, discussing poetry, reading classic literature, playing intellectual games, and quietly feeding the wild birds outside the great hall window. Their relationship deepened profoundly and irreversibly during a scary, unexpected wolf attack in the snowy woods, where the beast heroically risked his own life to fiercely protect Belle. Though he was severely wounded in the process, Belle tenderly, carefully cared for the beast's painful, deep wounds in the West Wing. Their emotional connection grew much stronger, and they realized that they shared a powerful, genuine, and surprisingly mutual affection and respect. The beast, completely and genuinely in love and determined to show profound trust, allowed Belle to temporarily leave the castle and return to her village to visit and reassure her sick, worried father. Morris Belle returned to her village and found her father quite ill, and the paranoid villagers, fiercely led by the jealous, vengeful Gaston, determined to lock Maurice away, wrongly believing he was completely insane. Gaston, the handsome but arrogant, mean-spirited hunter who obsessively wanted to forcibly marry Belle, led a massive, angry mob back to the ominous castle to savagely destroy the feared beast. Belle rushed frantically back to the immense castle, finding the wounded beast desperately trying to defend his home and his own life against the vicious onslaught of the massive, pitchfork-wielding mob. Fierce, terrifying, and brutal battle immediately erupted on the high, treacherous, slippery rooftop of the magnificent castle between the powerful beast and the vengeful, hateful Gaston. The noble beast fought valiantly and ultimately overpowered Gaston completely, but chose to show profound mercy, refusing to kill his defeated, cowardly rival, demonstrating the ultimate act of newly acquired, selfless kindnesses. The beast turned away to embrace Belle. The evil Gaston stabbed him cruelly and unexpectedly in the back with a hidden dagger, and the mortally wounded beast collapsed and fell onto the cold, snowy stone floor. Belle rushed tearfully to the dying beast, crying hysterically and desperately pleading with him to stay alive, confessing tearfully, "I love you, my dear beast. I truly love you with all my heart." Just as the final, sad, tiny rose petal gracefully detached itself from the stem and softly floated down to the cold floor, Belle's tearful, true, heartfelt confession miraculously broke the powerful, binding dark curse in a blinding, majestic flash of golden, overwhelming light and swirling, warm magic. The hideous beast's furry form instantly dissolved, and he transformed back into the handsome, kind, and noble prince he was meant to be all along. The enchantments on the castle were also broken. The servants returned to their overjoyed human forms, and the loving prince and beautiful Belle were soon married, ruling the kingdom with profound kindness and living gloriously and happily ever after. Once upon a distant time, within a vast, sun-drenched kingdom of high ivory towers and immaculately manicured gardens, the endlessly loving king and the gentle, radiant queen were finally blessed with the birth of their first, truly beautiful and immensely cherished daughter, whom they joyfully named Aurora. The entire prosperous nation erupted in spontaneous, overwhelming joy, and the grateful king commanded the preparation of a truly magnificent, weeks-long christening celebration, inviting every esteemed noble, every joyful villager, and every magical being to partake in the grand, public fest. 3 wonderfully good-natured, shimmering, and supremely powerful fairies gracefully descended into the palace's hall of celebrations, each prepared to bestow a permanent magical blessing upon the precious, cooing infant resting in her silk-lined, ornate golden cradlet. First magnificent fairy, named Flora, generously gifted the baby princess with unparalleled physical beauty, promising her features would shine brighter than the midday sun, while the second, Fauna, gave her the most melodious, heavenly singing voice imaginably. The immense, carved wooden doors of the hall were violently and dramatically flung open, and the truly terrifying, intensely malevolent evil fairy Maleficent materialized in an explosive burst of frightening green lightning and thick, choking, acrid smoke. Maleficent's eyes glowed with dangerous, uncontrollable, scorching fury, as she felt utterly insulted, deeply resentful, and completely disrespected for being intentionally excluded from the magnificent, important royal celebration. With a loud, piercing, and cruel cackle that brutally silenced the music and chilled every heart present, she dramatically raised her dark, powerful staff and immediately cast a dark, inescapable, and powerfully binding curse upon the destiny of the sweet royal heir. Before the heavy, fading sun completely disappears over the jagged western mountains on the exact morning of her approaching 16th birthday, the young Princess Aurora will surely touch a razor-sharp, magically corrupted spinning wheel and instantly fall into eternal, fatal sleep. Maleficent viciously and loudly declared. The third kind fairy, Merryweather, whose magnificent gift had not yet been delivered, quickly used her remaining magical energy to soften the curse's fatal power, transforming the inevitable death into a deep, long, but ultimately reversible enchanted sleep. The horrified and desperate king immediately commanded that every single spinning wheel, regardless of its age, size, or location, in the entire kingdom be ruthlessly gathered and ceremoniously burned into fine ash immediately in the royal courtyard to ensure the princess's absolute survival and safety until the curse's danger passed. The three worried good fairies disguised themselves as simple, elderly peasant women and carried the infant Aurora far away into the deep, quiet, secluded, and forgotten Emerald Forest. They secretly and patiently raised the princess in a tiny, quaint, moss-covered stone cottage, carefully concealing their true magical identities and strictly forbidding the use of any magic whatsoever. Inside the protective walls of the little home, they lovingly called the girl Briar Rose, and she matured into a truly gentle, exceptionally kind-hearted, and utterly unaware young woman, completely oblivious to her powerful royal heritage or the sinister dark curse looming silently over her. Fatesh spent her hidden, peaceful days happily singing melodious, enchanting songs while tending to the small, trusting woodland animals and picking colorful wild flowers and fresh berries deep in the quiet, sun-dappled wood. 17 peaceful, quiet, and uneventful years swiftly passed by, and on the very morning of her 16th birthday, the unsuspecting young woman was deliberately left alone while the fairies nervously prepared a small surprise celebration. The unsuspecting Aurora felt a strange, compelling, and inexplicable pull of curiosity, and was immediately and magically drawn toward a mysterious, crumbling, and strictly forbidden old tower located deep within the woods near the cottage. She quietly and cautiously ascended the dusty, narrow, winding stone staircase, her curiosity overriding her caution. until she reached a remote, isolated, and completely forgotten room at the very top of the ancient structure. She discovered a shadowy, incredibly old woman weaving intently at a mysterious, long-forgotten spinning wheel, a completely unfamiliar sight she had never encountered before in her sheltered, secluded life. A Maleficent, cleverly disguised as the seemingly harmless old woman, watched with cruel, intense satisfaction as the naive Aurora, drawn by magnetic curiosity, reached out and instantly pricked her delicate finger deeply on the razor-sharp, enchanted spinlith. Terrible curse immediately and completely came true. The beautiful Princess Aurora instantly collapsed onto a dusty stone bed, her breathing fading as she fell into a deep, long, magical, and irreversible slumber. Three good fairies immediately rushed back to the secluded cottage and found their beloved Aurora lying completely still, heartbreakingly pale, and forever trapped in the powerful, unbreakable magical sleep of her world. With profound sadness and recognizing their ultimate failure to protect her, they gently and sorrowfully carry the sleeping princess back to the immense, magnificent, but suddenly silent palace. Fairies tenderly laid Aurora upon the grandest, highest royal bed, surrounding her with protective, shimmering light and tearful, regretful goodbyes as they prepared for the long wait to prevent every resident from experiencing the terrible, agonizing grief over the next 100 years. The kind fairies quickly cast a powerful, final, benevolent sleeping spell over the entire massive castle, and everyone in Sedivery's soul instantly froze where they stood. The cook stopped stirring the soup, the royal guards froze mid-step, and the king and queen collapsed into slumber while desperately weeping over their daughter's bed. Immediately, massive, incredibly thick, impenetrable thorny vines, powered by Maleficent's persistent dark magic, aggressively and quickly grew all around the silent, towering castle walls and the surrounding moat. These immense, thorny, and magically enhanced walls completely sealed off the silent, magnificent palace from the outside world, effectively hiding it from the searching eyes of any curious traveler or potential rescuer. Magnificent, enchanted castle was utterly forgotten by the busy world outside, patiently lying dormant for 100 long, silent years, perpetually shrouded in a vast, dark, menacing blanket of magical thorns. Magical, thorny barriers grew higher, thicker, and more fiercely guarded with each passing decade, creating a giant, insurmountable barrier that prevented any premature prince from reaching the inner walls. The patient kingdom waited desperately for the predestined day a brave, heroic soul would finally arrive, the one fated by destiny to break the binding dark spell with the magical, healing power of true love's kiss. After 100 agonizingly long, quiet years had finally passed, a very handsome, strong, and exceptionally brave young prince named Philip rode his mighty white horse near the isolated, overgrown location. Prince Philip noticed the immense, strangely mountainous thicket of impossible, wicked thorns and heard faint, lingering, magical whispers carried on the wind about a beautiful princess sleeping inside the core. Maleficent, realizing the immediate and severe danger to her cherished curse, quickly transformed herself into a giant, grotesque, fire-breathing black dragon to personally block the brave prince's path and stop him completely. A fierce, terrifying, and thunderous battle erupted immediately in the shadowy gorge, with the determined prince fighting valiantly against the immense, roaring, flame-spitting dragon with only his courage and his shining sword. With the subtle, vital magical aid of the good fairies, the heroic prince managed to skillfully and accurately thrust his shining, enchanted sword deep into the terrifying dragon's scaled heart, finally defeating the supremely powerful Maleficent. The magical thorny vines instantly and completely wilted, disappeared, and crumbled into dust, allowing Prince Philip to finally ride his strong horse swiftly toward the gigantic, silent, and ancient castle entrance without obstruction. Climbed the highest, quietest tower stairs, passing the frozen figures of the sleeping king and queen, until he finally found the beautiful, sleeping princess lying peacefully still upon the grand, hidden bed struck by her incredible ethereal beauty and immense grace. The brave Prince Philip gently leaned down and tenderly placed a soft, deeply heartfelt, and pure kiss upon the princess's pale, waiting lips. The ancient, binding curse was instantly and completely broken by the power of true love, and the beautiful Princess Aurora slowly, gracefully opened her wide, stunning blue eyes, gazing happily at her handsome, heroic savior. The entire enormous castle immediately sprang back to vibrant life. The music resumed, the cook stirred the pot, the royal guards marched on, and the ecstatic king and queen embraced their beloved, awakened daughter, and they all celebrated their happiness, living gloriously ever after. Long ago, in a magnificent kingdom bordered by deep green forests, lived a princess named Snow White, whose extraordinary beauty was renowned throughout the land. Possessing skin as purely white as fresh snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black and glossy as polished ebony wood. Tragically, Snow White's gentle, kind mother passed away, and soon after, the king married a new woman who became queen. A woman whose dazzling appearance hid a dark and malicious vanity within her heart. The new queen was terrifyingly beautiful, dominating the court with her cold, commanding presence driven by an overwhelming, insatiable desire to be acknowledged as the most stunning woman in the entire realm. She guarded her most prized possession, a mesmerizing magic mirror, and every morning she would stand before it, demanding to know the name of the fairest woman with the solemn question, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" For many years, the mirror faithfully confirmed the queen's dominance, its reflection assuring her, in a deep, mysterious voice, that, "My queen, you are the fairest of all across the mountains and valleys of the kingdom." But as the seasons changed and the princess blossomed, Snow White's natural grace and pure-hearted charm surpassed the queen's cold beauty, becoming a beacon of light that grew brighter each day. One crisp morning, unaware of the profound change that had occurred, the queen stood before her enchanted looking glass, confidently posing the question that had always flattered her pride. The mirror's answer shattered her delusion, delivering a stark truth that echoed ominously, "My queen, you are beautiful indeed, but here in this castle, Snow White is 1,000 times more fair." Hearing this, the queen felt an agonizing, sharp spike of unbearable jealousy pierce her heart, causing her face to turn pale with fury, as her vanity instantly transformed into a burning, murderous obsession. Unable to tolerate the existence of a rival, she summoned her most trusted huntsman and, with a chilling command, ordered him to take the princess deep into the remotest part of the forest and return only after he had killed her and brought back her heart as proof. Trembling with fear and reluctance, the huntsman led the unsuspecting princess away from the safety of the castle, deeper and deeper into the quiet, isolated wilderness where few men dared to tread. When the moment of truth arrived, Snow White sank to her knees, pleading with tear-filled eyes for him to spare her life, promising tearfully that she would vanish into the world and never step foot back in the kingdom. Overcome by the innocence and despair in her young face, the huntsman realized he could not possibly harm such a gentle soul and decided, against the queen's cruel wishes, to let her go to deceive the maniacal queen. The huntsman swiftly hunted and killed a young wild boar, carefully taking its heart back to the palace and presenting it as the heart of the unfortunate princess fleeing through the tangled woods. Snow White was terrified by the rustling leaves, the looming shadows of the ancient trees, and the cries of the wild creatures, running until her delicate slippers were worn and her body was utterly exhausted. Just as darkness began to fall and her hope was dimming, she suddenly spotted a tiny, charming wooden cottage tucked away in a small clearing. With smoke curling peacefully from its chimney, she cautiously entered the small dwelling and found a strange sight. 7 tiny chairs, 7 tiny cups, and 7 tiny beds, all covered in dust and surprisingly untidy for such a small, neat house. Driven by her kind nature and hoping to earn a place to stay, Snow White immediately began cleaning, washing the dishes, sweeping the floors, and making the miniature beds until the house sparkled, feeling faint from hunger and exhaustion. She took a small sip from 7 different cups and ate a tiny piece of bread from each plate before lying down on one of the little beds, where she quickly drifted into a deep sleep as midnight approached. The actual owners of the cottage, 7 small men known as the dwarves Grumpy, Doc, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey, returned home. Weary from a long day mining precious jewels, the 7 dwarves were utterly astonished to see their normally chaotic home clean and orderly, and even more shocked to find a beautiful, sleeping princess occupying their little beds after hearing her harrowing story. They felt sympathy and agreed that she could remain in their home, on the strict condition that she would diligently manage all the housework, cooking and cleaning for them. They urgently and repeatedly warned her, with stern faces, never, under any circumstances, to unlock or open the front door to any stranger who might approach the isolated cottage while they were gone back at the castle. The queen once again stood before her mirror, only to have her fury renewed by the undeniable reply that Snow White was alive and safe in the dwarf's cottage. Mad with uncontrollable hatred, the queen realized she could only rely on herself. She locked herself away and began brewing a complex, sinister plan, using her darkest magic to create various disguises and poisons. Her first attempt saw her transformed into a frail, traveling peddler woman, carrying a basket of brightly colored but magically poisoned corset laces, which she offered to the princess at the door with persuasive flattery. The disguised queen convinced Snow White to try on a beautiful lace, which she then cruelly yanked tight around the princess's chest, causing her to fall to the floor breathless and unconscious. Fortunately, the dwarves returned moments later, noticing the strange old woman fleeing. They immediately saw the dangerous lace, cut it away, and watched with relief as Snow White gasped and slowly came back to life undeterred. The queen created a poisoned comb for her second attempt, but Snow White remembered the dwarf's warning and kept the door bolted, frustrating the queen's second plot and forcing her to retreat in a rage. The dwarves, now gravely concerned for their friend's safety, strongly reinforced their warning, making Snow White promise that she would not be tempted by anyone, no matter how innocent or pitiful they seemed. Driven to the brink of madness, the queen concocted her most deadly and beautiful creation, a flawless, red-cheeked apple, poisoned only on one enticing half, hiding the most lethal venom. Disguising herself as an elderly farmer's wife, she approached the cottage and used a clever trick, taking a bite from the safe, white side of the apple before urging Snow White to taste the irresistible red half. Seeing the gentle old woman seemingly eat the fruit without harm, the naive Snow White finally let down her guard, yielding to the temptation of the beautiful red color and taking a decisive, fatal bite. The moment the poisonous juice touched her lips, Snow White fell silently to the floor, the wicked spell taking hold, leaving her looking perfectly preserved, as if merely asleep, yet utterly lifeless. The queen, feeling a triumphant, cold satisfaction course through her veins, hurried back to her castle, asking the mirror one final time and at last receiving the answer, "My queen, you are the fairest of all." Upon returning, the distraught 7 dwarves found the princess lying still, and despite all their frantic efforts and loving care, they could not break the powerful, malicious curse cast by the queen. Unwilling to bury their beloved friend, because her skin still held a breathtaking, rosy glow, they built a magnificent coffin made of crystal and gold, placing her inside so she might be admired forever. After many months, a traveling prince from a neighboring kingdom happened upon the clearing and, seeing the princess within the shimmering glass, was instantly captivated by her serene, sleeping beauty. The prince, overcome with love at first sight, pleaded with the mourning dwarves to allow him to take the crystal coffin with him. As they lifted it, a jolt dislodged the small, poisoned piece of apple from Snow White's throat. Instantly, the color returned to her cheeks, her eyes fluttered open, and the princess was awake. She and the ecstatic prince soon married in a grand ceremony, while the queen met a fitting punishment ensuring peace and happiness reigned forevermore. Once upon a time, in a narrow cobblestone street of a sleepy, snow-covered town, an old shoemaker lived with his devoted wife in a small, ancient cottage that always smelled of rich leather and beeswax. He was a man of great kindness and tireless dedication to his craft, yet despite his immense skill, they had fallen into extreme poverty and could barely afford a single loaf of crusty bread for their supper. One chilly winter evening, with the wind howling through the cracks in the walls, the shoemaker realized there was only one single piece of fine leather left in his workshop, just enough for one final pair of shoes. With a heavy heart and a weary sigh, he carefully cut the leather according to his very best pattern and left the pieces on his scarred wooden workbench to be sewn together the following morning. "I am far too tired and discouraged to work tonight, so I will wake up with the first light of tomorrow to finish them," he whispered to himself before blowing out the candle and going to bed in the dark. The next morning, after a restless and cold sleep, he walked into the workshop and saw a genuine miracle sitting precisely where he had left his unfinished scraps of brown leather the night before. Instead of raw materials, there sat a pair of shoes so perfectly finished, with every silver stitch aligned and every surface polished to a brilliant, glass-like shine that reflected the morning sun. The shoes were sewn so delicately and with such exquisite, otherworldly craftsmanship that the old man rubbed his eyes in utter disbelief, wondering if he was still dreaming in the soft morning light. A wealthy customer happened to pass by the shop window, and being struck by the sheer, undeniable beauty of the shoes, he purchased them for a sum of money that was far beyond the usual market price. With this unexpected and life-saving treasure, the shoemaker was able to buy enough high-quality leather to prepare 2 new pairs of shoes to be worked on for the very next day's business. Once again, he spent the quiet evening cutting the leather into precise shapes and laid them out neatly on the wooden table, praying that the mysterious help would return to his humble shop once more. To his utter amazement and joy, the following morning revealed 2 more pairs of stunning shoes, glowing with a mysterious quality that no human hand in the entire kingdom seemed capable of producing. Thus began a cycle of daily magic, and the old man's humble business became more prosperous and successful than he had ever dared to dream during his long, difficult years of struggle and hunger. News of the miraculous footwear spread like wildfire through the town, and wealthy lords and elegant ladies from distant lands flocked to the shop to buy the shoes made by the mysterious, invisible master. But deep in his heart, the old shoemaker was restless with a burning curiosity, constantly wondering who was the secret, selfless benefactor helping him under the silent cover of the deep velvet night. As the festive season of Christmas approached with its falling snow, he suggested to his wife that they should stay awake all night to finally discover the beautiful truth behind this wonderful, life-changing mystery. The couple lit a single small candle, then quickly blew it out to remain hidden in the shadows, and huddled together in the corner of the workshop behind the heavy, dusty folds of the window curtains. When the grand clock in the town square struck the magical hour of midnight, the workshop window creaked open in a very gentle and silent manner, as if moved by the invisible hands of the wind. 2 tiny, nimble elves, who were wearing no clothes at all despite the biting winter cold, hopped onto the workbench with the incredible grace and speed of acrobats from a forgotten fairy tale. They immediately picked up the pieces of leather and began working with a joyful, feverish passion, their tiny hammers tapping out a rhythmic sound that was like a happy song in the quiet room. Their miniature hands moved the silver needles with lightning speed, pulling the thread through the tough leather so fast that the human eye could barely follow their intricate and masterful motions. In what seemed like only a few short heartbeats, the new shoes were completely finished, polished to a mirror shine, and arranged in a perfect, proud row upon the old shoemaker's workbench. Having finished their selfless task with a final touch, the 2 little elves hopped down, giggled softly to one another, and vanished through the window as quickly and mysteriously as they had first arrived. The shoemaker and his wife stepped out from their hiding place, feeling deeply moved and humbled by the pure, honest for kindness of these tiny, magical creatures who worked while the world slept. The wife whispered with tears of gratitude in her eyes, "These little spirits have rescued us from a life of misery and made us rich. We truly must find a meaningful way to show them our heartfelt thanks. It breaks my heart to see them working so hard in the dark with no clothes to protect their tiny bodies from the freezing winter air and the biting frost of this cold December night." So, with great care and love, she spent the next few days sewing miniature coats of fine wool, tiny trousers of soft green velvet, and knitting little pairs of warm, colorful socks with the smallest needles. The shoemaker himself joined in the joyful effort, using his very best tools and finest scraps to handcraft 2 tiny pairs of boots, using the most supple and expensive leather available in his entire shop. On the holy night of Christmas Eve, instead of leaving out pieces of leather, they placed the beautifully wrapped little outfits and the tiny boots on the workbench under the glow of the winter moon. They hid behind the curtain once more, their hearts beating with intense excitement as they waited to see the reaction of their tiny, hard-working guests to the wonderful surprise they had prepared. Exactly at the stroke of midnight, the 2 elves appeared through the window as usual and jumped onto the table, ready to put in another long night of labor for the kind old shoemaker. But instead of the usual brown leather and patterns, they found the bright, colorful clothes and the tiny, beautiful boots waiting for them in the very middle of the clean and quiet workspace. The elves let out high-pitched squeals of pure delight and hurriedly began to dress themselves, pulling on the warm wool coats and lacing up the tiny leather boots with great laughter and enthusiasm. They admired their new reflections in the dark window pane, dancing in energetic circles and singing a merry song that filled the entire workshop with a sense of pure, unadulterated Christmas joy. "Now we are handsome young gentlemen of fashion. We have no more need to labor over old leather and heavy shoes for others," they cried out in their tiny, tinkling voices that sounded like bells. With a final, playful somersault across the room, they leapt through the open window and vanished into the silent, snowy night, carrying their newfound happiness and warmth with them into the world. From that magical Christmas night onward, the little elves never returned to the workshop, for they had received the greatest gift of all, the gift of being seen, recognized, and loved by human hearts. However, the old shoemaker and his wife never wanted for anything again, living out their remaining days in total comfort, abundance, and peace in their cozy little cottage on the edge of town. The old man continued to practice his craft with joy, making fine shoes for his neighbors with his own honest hands, always remembering the touch of magic that had saved them in their darkest hour. The beautiful story of their gratitude and the tiny elves continued to warm the hearts of everyone in the town for generations. Long after the winter snow had melted away into spring,